Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about 3 tips for your swim jigs to make sure you can catch more bass out there on the water. So stay tuned and let's get right into it. So I haven't always been the biggest fan of swim jigs. I always thought chatterbaits would do the same thing a swim jig would do, and they fish in the same area. But as a couple tournaments last year and the year before, this has opened my eyes into how effective this bait can be, and you can really catch a lot of fish with it. It's very versatile, and it can actually do more things than a chatterbait can do with some of these tips we're going to talk about today. And it also helps when the fishing is very tough and they're very pressured, especially if fish are seeing a lot of chatterbaits. Again, some of the things we're going to do here will allow you to get more bites over guys throwing chatterbaits in the same area. So let's get right into it with tip number 1, a couple modifications I like to do with my swim jigs. So the first thing I'm going to do with my swim jig when I take it out of the package before I ever fish with it is decide, do I want to kind of make it a finesse swim jig or do I want to leave it as is? Unfortunately, once you do this, it is non-reversible, but it's something that I kind of do with almost all of my swim jigs. I find that it just helps overall to begin with. And all I do is kind of split the skirt in two here. You'll kind of see where this rubber band is in the center. Once you have it split 50-50 and you have the inside portion of the rubber band, I will cut out the inside portion here and get rid of all that inside skirt material while leaving the stuff on the outside. If you cut the outside in the front, it would make it look like a finesse cut skirt material, but that's not what we want to do. We want to take the inside out, and then when you fold it back over, it'll still have that bulk to it. It'll still have the flow and the length, everything you're looking for, but it will be much thinner on the inside. So you'll still have the good hook, you'll still have the weed guard you need, but it'll just be a thinner skirt overall. Not as bulky looking, a little less obtrusive in the water, and that is like my number 1 tip with a swim jig. I pretty much do that to all my swim jigs. Cut that inside out, doesn't make it as bulky. It allows it to get a little bit deeper in the water even, so you can fish it a little slower or faster if you want to keep it up higher in the water. And just with pressured fishing these days, trimming it up, making it a little bit thinner, putting a smaller trailer on there, which we'll talk about later, can really up your swim jig game. The next thing I'm going to focus on is my setup for my swim jig. Basically, I focus on 2 things, my line size and my jig head size, to determine where I'm going to fish this swim jig. So if I'm fishing offshore, sparse grass, big grass flats, stuff like that, I will go with straight fluorocarbon, 15-pound test most of the time. Occasionally I'll bump it up to like 17-pound test, and that's when I'm going to fish my 3/8 and my half-ounce swim jigs mostly. Allows it to get deeper. I can get it down in those weeds the fish are in. I can swim it through. It'll go straight through all the clumps of grass, and if it gets stuck, I can pop it free. The fluorocarbon has a little bit of stretch to allow the fish to get this in their mouth. I'll typically use one with a softer weed guard or a finer wire hook to make sure I get a good hook set on them. And that will just allow me to fish this swim jig very effectively offshore. A lot of places you're going to fish that chatterbait, which I was talking about. You can cover a ton of water with this thing, and it doesn't have the big vibrating blade in the front and something that every other person out on that grass flat with you is throwing. On the other hand, if I'm going to go up shallow and fish this swim jig, I will kind of do it a little bit differently. And what I will do is go to one with a little bit stiffer weed guard or a bigger hook, and I'll go to 30 to 50-pound braid. It is the same thickness as your fluorocarbon, if not thinner, but that braid will allow me to get it out of heavy cover, which I'm typically fishing that in some thicker lily pads, some heavier bushes or stuff up shallow, or anything in Florida. They got the Kissimmee grass and stuff like that. Those type of areas, I'm going to go with that braided line to allow me to actually get the fish out. The other thing I'll do when I'm fishing up there, besides the heavier hook and the stiffer weed guard, is I will downsize the head of my jig. So the 3/8 would be the biggest one that I would fish up shallow like that. I'll go down to even a 1/4 ounce and fish it a lot slower because it won't get hung up as much in that shallower cover. If you have one that's too heavy, you're going to be fighting to get your bait to rip free from cover all the time and not make it look natural. If you have a very light jig, the 1/4 ounce, swim it through and it gets stuck on something, it's much easier just to shake it out of the grass. It'll pop free, look very natural to the fish, and it'll get you a ton of bites You'll spend more time catching fish and making accurate casts than you will fighting your bait out of the cover. And the last thing that I focus on with my swim jigs is going to be my trailer selection, as we mentioned earlier. There are 2 trailers that I like to fish on my swim jigs. The first one is going to be a Kitech swim bait. The 3.8 works really well if you're looking for a bigger profile bait, and if you trim that skirt up on the inside, it'll give it enough room on the tail here for this tail to actually kick properly, perform right in the water, and it'll be a little bit longer of a tail. Or you can go down to a 3.3. I've done those as well. 3.3 works excellent on most swim jigs out there on the market. But my favorite trailer to put on the back of a swim jig is going to be the Zoom Z-Craw Jr. I like the Kitechs. They work awesome if your fish are feeding on bluegills, golden shiners in Florida, any type of bait fish like that, shad, I go with the swim bait. But if I don't know what the fish are feeding on, or if they're even feeding on crawfish or bluegills or stuff like that, your more traditional panfish up shallow, that's when I'll go to the Z-Craw, because it allows me to do 2 things. I can fish this like a swim jig. It has that thick body profile, deep body profile like a panfish would, and it'll swim through the water. But if I come up on a stump, a bush, a dock, whatever I want to flip into, I can take that swim jig, stop swimming it through the water, and flip my swim jig into whatever I'm fishing, and this will look very natural. It'll fall just like a regular flipping jig, and I have a 2-in-1 approach, especially if I'm fishing lily pads. I'm swimming my jig through the lily pads with this trailer on the back of it, and I get a bite and miss the fish. Instead of trying to swim it back through that area, you can mental note where you just got bit in those lily pads and flip your jig right into that lily pad, let it sink, like the fish killed or injured the bait fish, and it might go back and eat that same bait after you just missed that fish. So it allows me to be more versatile by using this as a trailer over the swim baits. I still do use both, but the Zoom Z-Craw is the one that I lean towards more often than not. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, learning about how to do a couple things to your swim jigs to land more fish while you're out there. And if you did, go and check this video out where I talked about what I do to my flipping jigs to catch a couple more fish while I'm out there on the water as well. And make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my fishing tips coming up.